Now let's talk about the MAC addresses that our virtual machines get. Now if you start to work in networking and start to troubleshoot networking to any degree, you're going to end up being concerned with the MAC addresses on these machines. Well, here's the first thing you need to understand. Workstation generates and assigns a MAC address for every virtual adapter in a virtual machine. So and the one in this course here that we've been playing with the most, the XP Professional Virtual Machine, if you remember back a few videos ago, I went in and added a second adapter, did some modifications to it. Well, each one of those adapters now has a MAC address assigned to it. Now, every time the virtual machine gets powered on, Workstation is either going to generate or assign a MAC address. Now the MAC address, the first time it's generated, is stored in the .vmx file. We're going to go take a look at that in just a minute. Well, actually, let's just go do it right now. And so the way to find this thing is to go out into, I'm going to drag it into the screen here, your virtual machines folder. Usually this is by default in Documents, My Virtual Machines, or Virtual Machines. And notice here's the XP Professional. Now if I go into this folder, you will notice there is the VMX file. Well, if I right click on this and open this with, in Windows it would be Notepad, but any text editor, you're going to see a lot of things, and somewhere down here, right here is the first one. Notice Ethernet 0 generated address. This right here is the MAC address for that first network card that was in there. That means the first one, of course, we're starting at 0. It's a zero-based array type situation. And then if you remember, we have two network cards. So if I keep going down and looking, there is my second MAC address for the second card. Now if I go out and use my standard TCP/IP tools at the command prompt in the virtual machine, I can see the same information. Okay, but those are generated, and let me move this out of the way. Now the virtual machine is going to receive the same MAC address every time it starts up because it's stored in that VMX file. But there are certain things that will cause that MAC address to change, and you need to be aware of that. One other thing you need to be aware of is that Workstation does not guarantee that the MAC addresses it generates for virtual machines will be unique across multiple host systems. Now multiple VMs on the same host system, you're going to be okay, but across multiple host systems you could have a bit of an issue there, so you'll have to check these things. Now the MAC address is going to change on your virtual machine when that VMX file gets moved. Even if you move it to the different location on the same host, you're going to get a newly generated MAC address. Now if certain VMX settings or certain lines in that .vmx file are changed or removed, it's going to generate a new MAC address. And if you remember that Ethernet 0 generated address, the N means the number of the network virtual network adapter. So if you change or remove the line that said Ethernet 0 generated address, then it's going to generate a new MAC address. Same thing for Ethernet address type, Ethernet generated address offset, UUID location or UUID BIOS, and Ethernet, whatever the number is, present. Any of those changes will make the MAC address get regenerated. Also, if you remove and replace the virtual adapter, it's going to change the MAC address. So if keeping that same MAC address is something that you're playing with, and there are situations, we won't go into them now, where you do want to maintain that same MAC address on a machine, be very careful with it. Now, so now you're thinking, and I can hear some of you saying, but wait a minute, Mark, sometimes I need to move the machine, I need to move that VMX file, but I want to keep the same MAC address. How do I do that? Well, I'm glad you asked. In the next video, or in a separate video here, I'm not sure it'll be next, you will find a video entitled Changing MAC Addresses, and we'll talk about how you can manually set a MAC address to whatever you want to. So I can make a note of what it is here, move the VMX file and all the other files somewhere else, and they just manually set it there. So look for changing MAC addresses, take a look at that, and you will see how to manually set a MAC address to whatever you would like it to be.